Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome out to our Jitterbit Tech Talk today, focusing on APIs. Let me introduce myself. My name is Corey Willis. I head up our enablement here at Jitterbit, things like Jitterbit University, all of our training. With me today is Micah Johnson, who works with us. He's typically back there running production for us, but today we brought him up. Micah, glad to have you on with us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So I brought Micah on today because Mike has been strategically working for the last, 2 months or so, going through hammering on our API management platform and working towards developing a new class for Jitterbit University, a new course. And so I thought, hey, why not bring on the guy that's actually been in there working on this curriculum that's going to go live. Hopefully some of you have been able to get out there and check out the newer course that we have. So that was around organizational administration, right?
I do believe so. We pushed that one out just a while back. And hope it adds some value to some organizations, and we hope to keep bringing some more courses here in the very near future.
Yeah, so more stuff coming down the road with Jitterbit University. I'll tell you some things around Salesforce.com. Last Tech Talk, we talked about local agent administration. That's going to be turned into a course, and so we're working on that one. Just some really cool things that are going to be coming out with that, developing more curriculum for you guys to get out there and learn. Also, we had a release in the US last night, right?
We did. 9.2 release. And I do believe the biggest feature that came out with that was for our NetSuite users, we now support token-based authentication. So it's no longer just SSO. So we hope that'll add a good bit of value to our NetSuite users.
Yeah, so if you're not aware, one of the big issues there when you're using SSO comes with some concurrency type of things where you can only do so many connections at a time. And the token-based authentication is supposed to really help with that for one thing. And there's some more out there, but check it out. Check out the release notes. It tells you all about it. And I'm sure we're going to be doing some things focused around the NetSuite token-based authentication coming up soon. It's probably some webinars and stuff. I actually really don't know exactly what we're doing, but I'm sure there's some stuff coming out there. But let's get on into today's Tech Talk topic. So today we're going to be focusing on Jitterbit APIs. Okay, a lot of you I know are already out there. You're already using Jitterbit APIs. But, if this is something you've used for a while, there are some newer features in the platform that we want to highlight today. So in the past, we've been talking a lot about best practices. We talked about like environment best practices, error handling best practices. Last time was local agent best practices. Today's a little different. We're not quite as much going into best practices, but more just feature exploration, right?
Absolutely. So we've had APIs in the Jitterbit platform for quite a while, but we're really bringing some new tools for management. Now, just to kind of level set, APIs are really just a way of interacting with a web accessible resource. And so what we've done is we have the power of Jitterbit integrations on the back end, and we've given you a way where you can tie that to an API, publish that out, and you can interact with your data a lot easier. And so we'll walk through some of the tools, the new API manager, some of the features that we've added to that, and we'll get some hands-on examples. Maybe that'll be some good stuff.
Awesome. So if you aren't familiar with this and you're joining going, I've heard about APIs and I know we connect to some APIs, but what is this whole thing with Jitterbit and APIs? Here's the thing is that Jitterbit's really great at connecting to other APIs, like Salesforce.com API, some other REST API out there. Maybe it's Google, maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's Magento, or SOAP APIs. But what about when you need to expose your data through an API? Do you call in a team of developers? You don't have to. That's what we're talking about today, is not connecting to existing APIs, but taking the connections that you already have to your systems and creating APIs on top of those. So maybe it's a custom database. That's what we're going to be working with today, right?
Absolutely, a Postgres backend.
But it could also be maybe another API or a conglomeration of APIs. Maybe you've got Salesforce.com, maybe you've got SAP, maybe you've got a database, and who knows what else, and you want to consolidate that into a set of internal APIs. We could do stuff like that too, right?
Absolutely.
Or here's something else that's a little outside the box, but if you already have APIs that have been developed, but you want to put that into a documentation portal, be able to control some access, credentialing or things like that around there, we could actually consume those APIs and then re-expose them, right? Essentially acting as an API proxy.
We can, absolutely.
So a lot of different things, but here we go. We're going to just go ahead and dive into it. By the way, as we're going through this, and I'm bringing mine up right now, we do have the Q&A panel in the Zoom webinar, and so you can use that, send over questions. We have this scheduled out, but here's our commitment to you. We do this at every Tech Talk. As we get towards the end of this, we're going to open up for full Q&A, and we're going to stay here as long as you have questions. That's a little dangerous at times, but it hasn't bit us yet. So we're going to commit to that as long as you have questions, we're going to try our best to get you an answer. We may not always have the answer, but we'll do our best to get you the answer. If we don't have it, we can try to direct you to the appropriate resource and have some follow-up there. So here's one that just came in, just to kind of clarify our discussion point. Jitterbit APIs are also how you best do real-time integration, even from something like a Salesforce or NetSuite, correct?
Absolutely.
So essentially, we expose the API. That system then calls that API in real time. So yeah, anything like that, if you're wanting to do internal APIs, business-to-business APIs, expose APIs for real-time triggers, all that type of stuff. Okay, so keep those questions coming. If it makes sense, we'll interject and answer them. Otherwise, we are going to have that Q&A at the end. We also have a little poll for you a little bit later. Want to get some of your feedback on a few things. But let's dive in. So first, we're going to talk about how you actually create what needs to be created in the Jitterbit Studio that we're going to later expose as an API, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So the beauty of this API platform, if we can pull the studio on screen, this is the Jitterbit Desktop Studio, Design Studio, whatever you want to call it. And most of you already have existing integrations. You already have operations that you've built out to interact with your data. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of design. There's not going to be a whole lot of coding that you're going to have to add. Really, you're going to take existing operations, existing things that you've built in the past that are already working, they're functioning, and then you're just going to add an API layer on top of that. So this is an example where we're writing customers to a database. Now, maybe in the past, we had this coming in from a different source. Maybe we had it scheduled to pull things from an FTP server and add them to a database. But now we want to add some more real-time functionality where people could send in maybe a JSON request and then add that to a database. So really, the functionality comes in how you design these things. The limitations aren't necessarily with the API manager, but how creative you can be with your problem solving when you build these integrations in the studio. So we have this operation where we're writing a customer to a database. We've got that deployed out. And then we can open the API manager, and we already have this API created where we're...
Now, Michael, let me interject real quick because a lot of people may not have seen this screen yet.
That's true. This is very new.
Can we show them how to get here?
Absolutely. So when you first log in, you're going to come onto this Harmony splash page, and it's got a download link for the Design Studio, your API manager. You also have Citizen Integrator and your management console, which most people know from the previous releases. But as of 9.0, everything is now consolidated into this Harmony portal. And so you can click on this API manager. This is where we were previously. And this is where you're going to deploy out your new APIs. This is where you're going to manage them throughout their API lifecycle, things like that. And it's all consolidated here in this one place. You're not bouncing back and forth between different applications.
So previously we had another set of screens for API management. This is basically just a new redesign. Those old ones are still available in the management console though, right?
They are available for now. But this is definitely the new place. It's a new look and feel. It's a very similar function, but as you're walking through, it's just a lot cleaner feel. You're moving through pages instead of trying to scroll through the setup. But it's a really nice, clean look. I'm a big fan of these tiles personally myself. I think they're really cool. You can even add in logos to make it a little more user-friendly, and those will show up in your documentation, which we'll talk about a little later.
Awesome.
So this is just an example of an API that's been previously created. And like I said, a lot of this functionality existed before, but one of the cool features is what we have now called the Portal Manager. So if we have our APIs, we want to be able to not just have an API, because that's great, but to enable our people to be able to use these APIs. I think that's one of the keys. And part of that is good documentation. I've worked with so many APIs that I have to kind of hack around. I have to get into Postman and just hit them and see what comes back. I don't know what I'm working with.
Documentation is one of those things where out in the API world, it's just some are awesome and some are very lacking, right?
Absolutely. So what our amazing team here at Jitterbit has done is they've brought in OpenAPI into the Jitterbit platform.
Now that used to be called Swagger, right?
It did, absolutely. And so these documents, you're using the YAML language to basically just document out how these APIs can be used. In fact, most of this is done by default. All of this that you see on screen is generated by default.
Now we automatically generate this documentation. The system already knows we have a JSON request, right? And so we use what we have built in the studio to automatically generate this. So they don't have to necessarily understand YAML for the basic stuff, right?
Right. And then you can Google for any customization that you might need if you don't know the language.
Of course, you can always customize it.
Absolutely. And what's actually happening here on the back end is Jitterbit is actually reading this transformation, and it's looking through, and so it knows exactly what to expect. And so then it's bringing these parameters from this transformation structure here into the Swagger document. And so if we want to test this, we can come to try it out, and it's just going to ask us for our JSON structure. Now I could just come in here and copy and paste, but to save a little time, I've got a JSON structure that's already built out here. So we'll copy and paste that in. And then I'm going to execute this, and all it's doing is calling the API, and we'll get our response down here. We got a 200, and we can set up our expected responses. So if we receive a certain response from the system, we can actually have the user interact with that. We can document that here so they know what to expect.
Yeah. Now in this operation, we're not necessarily providing a response, right?
Correct.
So it's just success. We received it. We did what we were supposed to do. So it's built exactly how the operation's built in the studio.
Absolutely. And then if we want to look at our database, we can refresh and scroll to the bottom, and we'll see that we have added Seattle Tech on line 75. Now that's a pretty simple use case. I know what you're thinking, that might not be the most challenging thing to do, to add a record to a database. But when you really think about the concepts of what we're doing, we're taking existing integration functionality, we're layering an API skin on it, where we can control access, we can grant documentation, we can enable users to get access to the data systems that they need. They're not having to log into multiple systems. They're not having to aggregate data. We're putting data in people's hands. And I think that's one of the most powerful principles that we're bringing with this API Manager tool.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a simple example of what you did with the data, but it doesn't really matter what our users are doing with their data.
Exactly.
Because you take whatever operation you've already built in the Jitterbit Studio, whatever system you're connecting to, SAP, Salesforce, NetSuite, custom databases, other REST endpoints, SOAP endpoints, it doesn't matter what it is. You have a request, you have a response. That's the basics of an API, right?
Absolutely.
In this case, we just showed the request side. Now, what if we wanted to go in and actually show them how to kind of start this? Because this was already built.
It was, yes.
So I think you have an example prepared where you can kind of show us how to do a query and do a get and have that show up in the documentation portal, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So this is an example. Now the operation is already built, so I'll give you that. It's not totally from scratch. But all we're doing is we're pulling records. We have a custom query in here. We're going to transform that from our database to a JSON structure, and then we're going to return that once again to our API. So if we go in here, back to the API Manager, we can go to My APIs. This is where you're going to create your new APIs or make changes to them. And as this is loading up, we're just going to create a new one over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And then it's just as simple as creating a name. And so we'll say get customer, something really simple. Now, everything in Jitterbit is sectioned off by environments. In this case, we only have one environment. But you'll see in our Swagger documentation where things are sectioned off through environments. We always want to set a version just as a best practice, just so we can manage it through its life cycle. And in this case, we are going to use a query parameter, and I want to add that in my description just so they know.
So query parameter, that's going to be something we're going to put in the URL to determine what we're looking for from this API, correct?
Correct. And so we'll take a look at that. I am going to enable cores that is a requirement to be able to use the portal to be able to test those, because it's coming from a different domain. You will need to enable cores.
Now you can still get the documentation without cores.
Absolutely.
But the little test features that are kind of built into the OpenAPI, the Swagger, that doesn't work without the cores.
Correct. Okay. And so all we've done so far is we just created a name for the API, name and version, and that's building out our service URL. Now we actually need to assign the operation that we want to trigger. So we'll select our project, our operation, which is query database, and our method. Now, this is get, put, post, delete, but we also have custom verbs. People are very creative when they build their API. So if you need a custom verb, we have that functionality here. And our response type is final target. You'll notice in the studio that we're returning whatever this transformation dumps to the target.
Real quick, go back to that for just a second, because I know some of our audience may not have even seen how to do that. How do you turn a standard target? Like if this were just going database to text, or no, well, not text, we're going to JSON. Let's say we were just going database to JSON to say an FTP or file share or something like that. How do we change that target to an API response?
It's simple. It's drag and drop. This one in this case, it's just a right click and you'll just use API response. And that's going to tell Jitterbit, hey, we're pointing this to an API.
As simple as that.
Absolutely. Deploy out those changes and you're ready to rock and roll. All right, so we've got our final target selected. We'll assign this operation. And we can assign multiple operations to a single API.
If we had, say, in this case, we've got Tech Talk 1.0 get customers. We could just have customers. And we can have our get and our post in the same endpoint.
You could.
And based upon the verb, it determines which operation it goes to, right?
And you can also do some really cool things with some API handler scripts where based on the parameters that are passed in or based on the condition, the verb, what have you, you can fire off multiple operations. And that's some pretty cool functionality as well.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll click next. Now we have security profiles in place. A lot of people just simply use basic auth, things like that. We're not going to do anything just because this is a demo, but
now some of the stuff we do there, we can do IP whitelisting.
You
can do the basic auth, username, password. You could simply pass in header values and handle that inside of Jitterbit if you want to do something more like a complex Oauth 2 or something like that. And didn't we bring in some other authentication methods, some other Oauth standards in there? I'll look that up as we're going on.
Yeah,
I think we recently expanded that.
All right, and then we can either save this as a draft where we would have access to it, but it wouldn't be published out to our documentation, and it would not be a live API. But in this case, we do want to publish it out. And now we have a live API. Because this is a GET, we could run this in the browser, but I really like our portal manager here. So you'll notice that it hasn't shown up yet in our documentation here. We're going to need to come in here and regenerate the documents. Now this is going to refresh the documentation that Jitterbit builds automatically. So just like anything, you need to exercise a little bit of caution here, because if you have made customizations to your documentation, you added descriptions, you've changed maybe the content types for some of your values, this will overwrite those back to the defaults.
Which is hence why we don't do it automatically.
Exactly. So we'll manually regenerate this. We'll get a little warning, but we'll say, yeah, go ahead and do that. And then we'll see our get customer here. All right. Now on screen here, let me see if I can get to the correct place. You see we have a get. Now, because it's a get, these aren't coming through the transformation. So we don't know what we're working with.
We're using variables.
Exactly.
So we don't have that XML or JSON structure that it can automatically read in this case. So we do it a little different way, right?
Exactly. So this is where you'll get to manually edit this documentation. I could do it, but once again, I'm going to copy and paste just to save a little bit of your time so we can get to more important things like Q&A. And so we'll just kind of highlight this. Now, YAML is all based on basically how things are spaced. So if it gets off just a little bit, it'll throw a flag, but a little space there and we're good to go. So now we can save and publish these documentations. Anytime you make changes, you do have to save them. Otherwise, it will refresh and go back to those defaults. So now we can click on our get option. We can click try it out. And we have an awesome query parameter.
And we put in Seattle Tech on our post, correct?
I do believe so. So let's search for that one. Seattle. We'll execute, and let's see if we get a JSON response. And we do. ID number 75, Seattle Tech. That was the most recent database entry that we had from this last operation.
So from a testing and management standpoint, you're creating APIs, and there's a lot of different ways we can create APIs. But let's just take the use case of internal APIs. So we've got data systems. We're going to create this API layer and let other people within our organization have access. But rather than emailing JSON documents back and forth, now we have an internal developer portal. And I mean, we just saw it live on what it takes to do this. It's really a pretty simple interface to go through and give you solid documentation. Not only documentation, this is one of the things I've always loved about Swagger or OpenAPI now, is that you can go in right inside the documentation and run your tests. Because like you said, a lot of times when we're developing integrations against APIs that may not be documented that well, we have to do a lot of trial and error.
Absolutely.
We have to hit the API and see what it's sending back to us, right? Here we can do it right inside the documentation. And I don't know about you, but I absolutely love that. But yeah, awesome feature set. And by the way, while you were going through that, I did take a quick look, and we did add an Oauth provider in there as well, where you can do Google as your identity provider. And so that's great for those that have standardized on things like Google Apps, is you could do that. Now, once we have this in the portal, it's great. We can see it. What do we need to do to get access to other people that are going to need that? Because if we've created the APIs, there's a good chance we may not need the documentation ourselves. We want the documentation to be available to others inside our organization, possibly outside our organization, if we've got partners working with it and things like that. So how do we do that, Micah?
Well, Jared, if you'll pull this back up on screen, we'll switch over to the management console. And like I said before, everything in Jitterbit is segmented by environments, and that pretty much includes permissions, other than the administrator, because they need it all. So we're going to switch to the management console. And when you want to invite people, you're going to go to your organizations, and then here you'll have the roles segmented out. And in this case, we have a role called Portal Access, and we can add people to this role. They just need read permission here.
Now, that's not a default role, right? We created that.
Yeah, we created that just before the webinar, believe it or not, just to show you guys. And so you're going to add people to that role. Now, that alone is not enough. You will need to add that role, give the role access to whatever environment they need the documentation for.
And they need read access there. So technically, here's one of the things that you have to consider. And we keep talking about this from like an internal API scenario. If somebody has read access into an environment, they can actually go get the project as well. So currently, we don't have it set where you can do just the API manager or just the API portal. You do get read access into the environment as well. And so just something to be aware of. This is going to be something that's going to continue to evolve as time progresses. But that's where we've started this thing with the portal manager. And but they don't have to have execute permission. They don't have to have write permission, so they can't overwrite your project. But if you do have stuff in there that's a little sensitive on your project, just be aware that does give them access to read that project. So they could actually get the studio, they could download that project, and they could see that project design with that. But for internal use case, that's typically okay. And so that's why that's there. Well, real quick, let's pause because we've got a question that came in, and I think it's appropriate to go over here now. The question was, just to confirm, can you turn any integration already built within Jitterbit into a standard Swagger API and be able to call it from outside your environment? Okay, now this is kind of a loaded question because there's a few different things that come in here. Okay, first of all, licensing can come in. Okay, not every Jitterbit subscription is currently licensed for APIs, and if you are, you may have limitations on that. So just check with your customer success manager on that. From a technical perspective, and this is tech talk, so we like to stay talking tech and not licensing side of things, but I always want to mention that. But from the technical side, how do we get, I mean, pretty much anything that we have, and let's jump back to the studio here for just a moment on the screen, but anything that we have already built, and I say anything because, oh my gosh, that's that's such a broad topic,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, pretty much anything that can receive in a request and send back a response, we should be able to do something like that, correct?
Yes, pretty much. There are some stipulations, so we can expose. I wish you could see me. I'm putting any in quotes. We can expose any operation as an API. So if we want to be able to trigger it, if we want to be able to pass in data, receive data, that kind of stuff, as an API.
Let me interject. You said trigger.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I'll tell you guys, this is one of the things I love, because a lot of times we'll set up our operations on schedules,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes we want to be able to do those more manually, and or automatic from an external system.
Mm-hmm.
So you could actually create an API that doesn't take any input,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't use output, but acts as a trigger.
Correct.
Just simply gives a 200 OK response,
Mm-hmm.
and it activates it just the same as if a schedule were going to activate it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't even have to interact with it. You can just say, go run this operation. And you've now exposed that essentially as an API, even though you don't have any data moving with the API.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way.
Right, and you'll make those as a GET so that you can just click them and let your browser execute. You don't have to have Postman. You don't have to use any external system. So those are really great. Now, you did talk about, in the question, I believe they said something about and be able to work with them like in the OpenAPI.
Yeah.
So that's where another kind of stipulation comes in. It's not really an issue. You just have to be aware of it. In order for those documents to be generated, an operation must have a transformation. So, and let me clarify again, if it's like a web service call, if you've dropped in a WSDL, not just a request transformation, a response transformation. It has to have that, so it can't be set to pass through or an archive. And then it has to have either an API request or an API response. So either your source or target has to interact with the API.
You showed us how to do that on target. It's just as simple on the source. You just right-click, use API request.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have those, then you should be able to generate.
Yes.
Now, ideally, and just talking standard REST protocol, I guess if you want to call it that, JSON or XML is going to generate the structure.
Mm-hmm. Pretty standard, yeah.
So if we're doing something a little more out of the box, it may not generate your structure documents perfectly, or at all, depending. If you're using all variables, it can't anticipate the variable structure. If we're doing something more like text, it doesn't really document text structure very well. But your standard REST endpoint structures of JSON and XML should be just fine there, right?
Well, and I do believe, now I could be wrong, but I do believe on the text structures, it will generate the expected response.
Okay.
As long as it's in a transformation, it'll say, hey, we're expecting this CSV.
You see, guys, this is why I bring Mike on, because he's been in the one hammering on it.
If I'm wrong, just email me, let me know.
Yeah.
But I do believe that's the case.
So just easy ways to get it out there. So going back, can we turn any integration already built within Jitterbit into an API? We can. Some of those might have request data coming in, either through URL parameters, through the body, things like that. Response we can handle through documents and XML, JSON, even text. And then can we do the Swagger or the OpenAPI docs? Well, that comes in for for those more standardized structures. Be able to call it from outside your environment. Well, the great thing about Jitterbit APIs, even if you're using a local agent, remember we talked local agent last time, even if you're using a local agent, that's hosted at that point on Jitterbit's API gateway. So yes, you can call it from outside your organization, even if you're using a local agent secured by your firewall, because all the communication goes through the Jitterbit messaging, right?
That's right.
So a great way to do it. Of course, always take into account security. We're not diving too deep into that today. We kind of highlighted some of it. But hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to bring in follow-ups in here. We had another one just come in, and I haven't proved this, so we're going to go live with it. What does the reporting look like for these APIs?
That's a great question.
And so we'll start there. There's more to it, but we'll just start there and let you show that. So let's switch over to the screen, and Mike is going into the API logs.
Yeah, so let me just show you how I got here. Pretty much everything in the API manager is driven through this, I call it the drop-down menu. I don't know what the official term is, but you have the My API section, Portal Manager, Portal, blah, blah, blah. Based on your permissions, you'll see different things. But what I clicked on here was the API logs. And so it's basically just showing, hey, these are the requests that have come through, and we can expand out these requests. We can see where they came from. We can see the URI that was hit, the method, and we can really get very granular and track this stuff down. And it's even going to capture. So in this case, it captures what was passed in, and then it says, hey, this was run successfully. So you have the full logs. If you're more of a visual person and you just want to see usage over time, a lot of times that's very valuable. When you're trying to determine the life cycle of an API, are people actually using this? Do we need to get rid of this? You can look in your analytics, and it's going to show you kind of your hits per day, your average, your response times can be very important. You know, if these APIs are dragging around, they're taking some time, you might need to refine how they're built. You might need to make them more efficient so they're not such a drain on your resources. APIs are supposed to be very quick and agile. So a lot of this data can really help you out if you're getting lots of access denied and maybe people are trying to hack your systems. You know, there's lots of data that you can bring in through these analytics to help you streamline your organization, help you be more efficient with your data and with your integration.
So this screen right here, this analytics, this kind of goes on about reporting for how many hits you have in a minute or hour, day, week, month, etc. Mm-hmm. This is where we really get to see that number of hits, mm-hmm. and we can see, you know, hey, if something is slamming our APIs at a particular point in time, particularly or possibly putting us at close to that threshold for licensing purposes that we don't like to talk about. But this is where you would see that.
Yes, absolutely. And then you can take the appropriate action from there, like removing people's access or whatever you need to do.
Removing people's access. Nobody would ever do that, right?
Yeah.
So let's see. What about, and this one's, you know, Tech Talk. We answer your questions. Like I said, we may not always have the appropriate answer, but we'll do our best here. Is there a real-time log stream to a custom log ingest point? So let's go back, because I think I might be able to hit on this. If we go back to that debug log, the API logs, yeah, and we see it. So here's the thing: is all of this here, this is populated basically in real time, so you can see it here. I feel like the spirit of this question, though, is can this come to a custom log mm-hmm. system? Now, everything that is powering Jitterbit behind the scenes is powered by APIs. So this right here, what you're seeing, this API log, there's an API somewhere back there that powers this. So if that's a critical feature for you, talk to us and we can go in and do the research, figure out what that API is, and see what the functionality would be. I don't know the specifics on it. That's why I'm talking a little bit more vague on it. But I do know that those are there, and I know that we have people that are using the Jitterbit APIs. Here's the cool thing: is they're using Jitterbit to connect to the Jitterbit APIs to then put that into their custom logging system. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. But here's where you can see it in the portal. But yes, that is possible to take any of Jitterbit logs and pull those out and put them into your own custom logging system here. So let me kind of keep going through the questions here. So here's one as far as security goes. Mm-hmm. And Mike, you may know this. Actually, I think I see it right there. Can you see IP addresses that are hitting the APIs?
Yes.
I actually glanced over, saw it there on that screen. So if we jump back to the screen real quick here, Jared, you can see there the source API. So as far as doing that, and of course, in your security profiles, you can do IP whitelisting mm-hmm. as well. So that's always an option. Can you enforce rate limits by user on an API?
By user?
In the security profile.
I do believe so. So once you create the profile, I think each profile can have.
Yeah, go and scroll down there.
A rate limit. Yes.
Right there, rate limit. Mm-hmm. So it's on the security profile. So you create that profile for that particular user, and yes, you can rate limit it mm-hmm. for that user.
Now it defaults, I do know this, it defaults to the number of hits per minute for your organization. So if you don't set it, it's not unlimited. It's just at your licensing level.
Right. So you could have one user that could consume everything.
Yeah.
And that's not good. So let's see here. A couple other questions coming in. Keep those coming. Like I said, we're here as long as there's questions, and we're really at that point. I'll tell you what, actually, as I'm reviewing these next two questions that have come in so far, let's go ahead, because I know some people are needing to drop. Let's go ahead and pull up our poll where we want to get some feedback from the audience here on just a few different things. Some of it's directly related, some of it's not. So things like, are you using Jitterbit APIs today? Is your organization currently using Jitterbit APIs? Hopefully a lot of you are. Some of you may not be, and you're out here kind of curious about them. If you're not, do you see value for your organization in creating, implementing, and managing APIs with Jitterbit, kind of like we've shown you today? And hey, we're just kind of curious. Some of you may not see a value in that for what you're doing, and that's fine. Some of you may see, well, 6 months to a year down the road, I see the potential value. We're not there yet. That's fine. Now, here's another thing, not related to today's Tech Talk, but Tech Talks in general. We're really curious. We're looking at potentially doing a series of Tech Talks focused around specific endpoints. So some of our options that we put in the poll: Salesforce.com, NetSuite, SAP, Dynamic CRM, custom databases, custom REST APIs. If you guys are sitting there going, we're connecting to these and we're really curious about kind of some tips and tricks, best practices around these things, let us know which ones, and we're going to kind of use this to determine which priority we put these in if we continue to go down that route, which I think we will. Just a matter of time. And the last one, we've got Dreamforce coming up. What, about 6-7 weeks away, something like that?
Getting close.
And we're supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going, we'd kind of like to know. We'd love to meet up with you and just shake your hand, say hey, and put a face with the name that pops up on screen. So yeah, we'll be there. At least that's the plan. But so just curious there. And we're going to leave that poll up there for just a few moments. Let's go back to the questions now. Let's see here. Just a quick question. Are you planning to add payment rates into the portal for APIs? That's more a product roadmap question that we don't really know too much about. We get the internal notifications and things like that, but that's one that that we can send over to your CSM and let them kind of do some follow up, and they'll probably want to get a few more specifics about the spirit of that question so they can get you a good answer. But we'll get you a follow up on that one because it's not one that we really know a good answer to live. But let's move on here. Can you aggregate API, or let me start over with that.
Right.
Can you aggregate IP logs from a visual reporting? Instead of seeing individual logs of IP address, you can see it in a given IP address hits at some very large number. So basically kind of grouping is what I think I'm understanding here, grouping by the source IP. Well, you can do a filter on it.
You can.
I know you can do that. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, if we can go to that level. So let's do a follow-up on that one as well. We'll mark that one as a follow-up. We'll try to get you a better answer on that one. Let's see what else here. We've just got a couple little comments. We'll take those. Let's see. Debug logs are limited to 15 days. Is it possible to increase the number of days to 30 or 45 days? Sometimes we need logs to troubleshoot production. And just to find out that debug time has expired. Oh, something happened 3 weeks ago, and we don't have a debug log. Do you know on that, Mike? I'm not sure on where that's at. If that's something that we can do. I see there up the top right, you've got view data last 7 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can extend that out a little bit.
But we're talking, I think, debug logs here in particular.
Mm-hmm.
We may have to do a follow-up on that one. It's just not something I'm an expert in that area, so I'd hate to give you a bad answer.
Yeah.
So we'll do a follow-up on that one there. Well, Micah, I've gone through the questions that have come over. If you guys have more questions, like I said, we're here until your questions are answered. Well, at least as best we can.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got questions, go ahead and type them in. But was there anything else that you had that you wanted to show us today?
I think that was most of what I had prepared really for the Tech Talk. But I do want to say that the course that's coming out goes much more in depth in almost every one of these areas that we've just kind of touched on it, touched the surface. So if things like header auth interest you, if things like digging into Oauth 2 and security profiles, if those things interest you, then keep an eye out on Jitterbit University for an upcoming course.
And we're probably talking still about 60 days,
probably so.
Roughly, with where we're at on that. So it's still going to be just a little bit, but we are working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we're also working on the local agent administration course. If you're curious about that, the last Tech Talk, where are the Tech Talks at?
On Success Central, so you can go to success.jitterbit.com.
Success. You can also just Google search Jitterbit Tech Talk. It'll take you right there, because I always forget the direct URL, and that's how I find it. But they're archived out there. So this recording also, what we're doing right now, about 48 hours or so, this should be out on Success Central, be on our YouTube channel as well. So we keep those out there for you guys in case you have to drop early or in case you're not able to make one. But yeah, some great stuff coming out for Jitterbit University. Like I said, Salesforce.com is in the works, the local agent administration, the API. We've got others slated after that. So a lot of new stuff going to be coming. A few more questions that have come in. And like I said, we're here while questions are here. So let's see what we've got. We use Jitterbit agents for our application, but I've never seen the portal console. Is there something recently introduced? This is relatively recent. It came out in 9.0, right? And we just went 9.2 last night. And so it is relatively recent. You would see it in the from the Jitterbit portal. So you go to login.jitterbit.com, sign in. That's where you're going to see those app cards. Now you do have to have the proper permissions to access. And so to see the API manager, you're going to have to at least have read permissions on an environment, right?
That's correct.
And that's about it. So yes, it is relatively new, but it should be out there and available. Let's see, any plans, it might be a roadmap. Let's see, any plans yet for the historical HTTP endpoint component versus custom API feature? Automatic logging, avoiding gateway timeouts, and no cost to make the HTTP endpoint still attractive. So HTTP endpoints, this is an older feature in the that you can use with local agents. Not really, from what I understand at least, not a lot of plans to enhance that necessarily. There's just a lot of poor fault tolerance with that.
Well, and it's a less secure way to access your data. You're having to poke holes in your firewall to give people access to that. So the API platform, the reason we're pouring everything into it is because it is much more secure and much more robust, I would say.
So moving on here, we do a ton of connections between Salesforce and Netsuite. Given the Salesforce API first model, is it more efficient to use Jitterbit's API Studio or the API Manager for Salesforce integrations from Netsuite? So I would say it depends on the use case. Now, if you're talking about going into NetSuite and using SuiteScript, or going into Salesforce and using Apex and building integrations that way, is it more efficient to use Jitterbit? I would say yes, at least from a development standpoint. From a processing standpoint, you may introduce a small amount of latency, but we're talking so small compared to the development time frame of trying to do things in something like SuiteScript or Apex. If it were me, I would go Jitterbit in a heartbeat, and I know that's probably biased. But even if I didn't work at Jitterbit, that's what I would do. So yeah, Salesforce and NetSuite, they've both got great APIs, but they don't really have great ways to consume external APIs and make those connections. And so that's where Jitterbit comes in. And if you want to do the real time, Salesforce, you're probably going to hear some more stuff on some things. But several years ago they came out with Salesforce Connect, toting that as a great way to connect to external APIs. What they didn't tell people is it had to be very specific and OData compliant API, and people were like, "Well, how do I get that?" And they're like, well, "Good luck."
You use Jitterbit.
Jitterbit can do it. Yes, absolutely. If you've got SAP and you don't want to do all of the NetWeaver, everything that has to go on behind the scenes, you can use Jitterbit to do the OData compliant API. So their APIs are great, but they're for connecting to, not for connecting outside. So you have to do a lot of custom stuff for that. So that's what I would say. Hopefully that gives you some feedback. Let's see here. Well, you have to have purchased a license to use API Manager to participate in the Jitterbit University course on APIs. No, we're gonna find a way for you to do that. Currently, we do everything through our Learning Sandbox, and so we can do some things there. Technically, if you do the Jitterbit trial, you also have 30 days that you can go out there and play with it. We're going to find a way that you can get hands-on with some of that, even for the university course. And because, I mean, what better way for you to determine whether it's a true value to your organization than to get out there and get hands-on? So we're going to find a way to do that we haven't gotten that far yet, but we're getting there. Let's see, is API management only available to be used with the Cloud Harmony or also with local agents?
No, you can actually, all of the features that you're using for APIs that are running on cloud are available for local as well. That's the beauty of the Harmony platform, is it is one platform to manage all of these things, not just, it's not like we can't get to the stuff behind your firewall. That's the beauty of this platform.
Okay, so yeah, local agents, absolutely. Cloud agents, absolutely. It's all the same technology.
Mm-hmm.
So here's one as far as integrating with the older version of the Jitterbit agent console. If we're looking at, let's just go show them this, because we do have the logging capabilities in here in the management console. All the old stuff is still there, but you should still have all of this as well. It's all technically connecting to the same data behind the scenes. It's just a new user interface. But let's switch over to the screen real quick. Mike is pulling this up. He's going into the management console right now. And there we see API Management Classic. And so you see where you can get to creating those. And if you look at API Analytics, this is where you can view your traffic and your debug logs. So there's the traffic. And then let's go over to the debug logs, because that's where we're really going to get to see the logging capability. So there it is in the older console. Same data, just a different approach to getting there. Now, if we're talking something even older than this, and we're talking like, the HTTP endpoints, that's a whole nother story. It doesn't come into this at all. So let's see here. Here's a comment, and I think this is mainly for the group. I don't know if I have an easy way to get this out to everybody, but it's actually a documentation from Success Central. You can search for it, but it's called Configuring Outbound Messages, I believe. Let me expand this where I can, Configuring Outbound Messages with Harmony API. So it's just a bit of documentation out on Success Central that really goes in detail about how to configure real-time integration with Salesforce using a Jitterbit API, and I believe Salesforce outbound messaging. Now you've also got other things like Salesforce CDC, the change data capture. You've got the, what's the other one? The Salesforce platform events. And we've got ways you can do that too if you want to stick with those types of technologies. There are ways we can do that. But yeah, that's great. Just go out there, Success Central, and you can search and see all of that type of stuff. But yeah, that particular document, if you just search Salesforce outbound message Jitterbit on Success Central, you're going to find that. Well, we are nearing the top of the hour. We do still have some time, but we've gotten through our backlog of questions here. And so we'll give just another moment or two. But I want to say, guys, thank you for making this Tech Talk series successful. This is something that we contemplated for a long time. We weren't sure what the response was going to be. And so we're going to try to do these. We're targeting typically about the first Tuesday of every month. Sometimes based on other events, we move them around. But we always appreciate your feedback. And like I said, these are always going to be archived out on Success Central. So if you have something historical you want to go see, it is out there. But yeah, thank you for coming out. And I hope it's a value to you. Here's one last question. We'll take this one. If any others come through, we'll answer them after the fact. But one last question here. Can we access API metadata and API logs using an API?
Yeah, technically. Those are those internal Harmony APIs that we talked about. So if you'll get with your customer success manager, they can talk with the product team, and they can get you those in your hands based on your use case, seeing what the need is there. But yes, that is possible. Everything on Harmony, everything on the back end runs on internal APIs.
So we don't necessarily have those publicly published, but they are available as needed, and we can definitely help you out with that if need be. Well, with that, everybody, like I said, if you have any other questions, go ahead and send them over. We'll get a follow-up out to you. But thank you for coming out. If you're coming to Dreamforce, please come find us. I think we'll probably be in the dev zone most of the time, myself and Micah, but we've got a lot of different things going on there. But we'd love to meet you, love to put a face with the name on screen. And so with that, everybody, thank you and enjoy your week.